Introducing Mike Grandinetti, a remarkable serial entrepreneur, disruptive innovator, and a thought leader. As my professor of entrepreneurship at Hult International Business School, his expertise and insights left a long lasting impact on me and countless others. But there's more to Mike than meets the eye. With teaching experience at prestigious institutions like Berkeley, Harvard, Yale, MIT, and Brown, his influence extends far and wide. I encourage you to follow the link to his profile, which is provided below, where you can tap into his wealth of knowledge and learn from his wisdom. In this captivating video, we delve into the future of entrepreneurship, the value of working in a culturally diverse environment, and the advantages of studying abroad in today's world. Mike graciously shares his go to resources, including books and articles that are instrumental in personal and professional development. So sit back and relax and immerse yourself into this remarkable interview with Mike Grandinetti. Prepare to gain invaluable insights that will inspire and broaden your understanding of the entrepreneurial landscape so you'll know what you're up against. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to learn from one of the brightest minds in the field. I really hope you enjoy yourself. Thank you. So, Mike, I want to ask you, so what is it that made you decide that you wanted to teach?
Yeah, and as you can imagine, I did not come from a family of academics, so it was not a goal of mine. And it turns out that the way it happened was as a traditional entrepreneur working in Boston in the early 1990s, right? Entrepreneurship was a very esoteric career choice. It wasn't the sort of the widely understood choice that it is today. Right now, you can study entrepreneurship almost anywhere, and it's become this very popular career choice. So having had a couple of successful startups early, both of the first two actually went public. I was lucky enough that became somewhat known within the Boston community. And so about the time of my second startup being successful, MIT began what they called their Entrepreneurship Center. And in the mid 1990s, 96, 97, they legitimized the study of entrepreneurship at a major university, right? Stanford had done it, but MIT was one of the very first. And so because I became known to them, I was given the opportunity to teach a couple of different courses.
Yes.
And for me, it was like, well, why not, right? Why not try this? And what I realized very, very quickly is how much I loved it, right? It became so obvious to me. And friends of mine who would see me after I was teaching would say, "You must have been teaching today." And I would say, "How would you know that?" They would say, "Because it's just all over you, right? When you have been teaching, there's something about your energy that is even more significant than what it normally is." So I started realizing by the feedback of others that, there was something about teaching that sort of transformed me. And I also just found that I loved sharing my knowledge and the hard-earned wisdom that came along with starting some companies with others, right? And so it really started to feed me. Now, remember that for a very long time, I didn't just teach, right? I taught in the evenings, or I taught on days off, or I taught while I was running companies. And so I had been living a dual life for a very, very long time.
Right.
And even while I was at Hult with you, right, I was involved in startups.
Yes.
And so Hult was a part-time teaching gig. But I'd say that I really fell in love with teaching when I got to Hult. And when I was asked to teach social entrepreneurship, it was such a new topic,
right,
that I didn't really know what it was. But as I started preparing myself to teach that magical course where I first met you and so many of your fellow classmates, that was probably the minute that I realized this was something that I was going to do for the rest of my life. And so 20 years later, right, literally 20 years later now, I have taught thousands and thousands of students. And I still get letters from some students in India on Teacher Appreciation Day 20 years later, right? But then I get wonderful feedback from people like you that said that I've had an impact on their careers. And so that is spiritual currency for me, right? That is way more important than money. And so this thing has become sort of my life's work. And I just can't describe in words how blessed I am to get to do this and meet so many remarkable young people like you.
Absolutely. I mean, I can see why you love it so much. I mean, to impart your knowledge and the way you do it, you where do you find the energy? You have the same energy today that you did 10 years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think that I won the DNA lottery. My dad is a very energetic man and always has been. So I have that, inherently. But again, when you do what you love, as you know, because you were doing what you love, right? It feeds you. And
Yes.
so if you're doing what you love and you get to do it with people that you enjoy and respect, it's this virtuous cycle, right? And so today I was lecturing. I gave lectures at two universities here in Baku. And, in the second one that I just came back from, it was a group of about 40 students. And it turns out that the projector in the room wasn't working, so I couldn't use slides. And it was just literally a discussion for 90 minutes. And their questions and their curiosity and their hunger to learn just fed me. So that's where the energy comes from.
That is
Yeah.
amazing. So now that you have taught so many people, like taught such a diversity of people, what do
Yeah.
you think is the difference between international students and local students?
Yeah. I mean, there's no question that if a student has made a decision to come overseas, to leave their homeland, to leave their family, and to study, it's a very clear indication that they are very, very serious about their studies, right? And especially if they're going to be studying in a language other than their native language, right? So they already know that they have a lot of obstacles, right? And I think, we all know how many students will get homesick in the first semester, right? So I think that in general, students that come from overseas are just more committed than those students that are studying in their local country, right? And that may not sound like a fair characterization, but there's a lot of additional obstacles that you need to overcome in order to be able to study overseas and be effective as a student, right? It's one thing if you just come over and hang out, but you have to very quickly put all of that behind you
Right.
and put yourself into your studies along with everybody else. And you may not be able to have a bank account the way that local students can. You move into an apartment and it's not furnished, and now you have to learn how to go out and buy furniture in the United States, right? So what I would say more than anything, though, is that every student should study abroad.
Yeah.
American students should leave the comfort of this country. And to me, there's very few things that are more educational than leaving your country and being willing to see how other people live. And for Americans, especially, who are probably less worldly than most students,
Right.
right? Because we have this big country, and for a long time, you didn't have to pay attention to anything outside the borders. I think American students in general are a lot less aware of the world around them, once you leave the United States. So I think that there's incredible value in studying overseas, no matter where you come from.
True, true, very
Yeah,
true. And this is something that we, focus on creating awareness about in India as well. So, what do you think every student should do before they step into the workplace? Because working abroad is a whole other ball game. And we all
absolutely.
struggled with it. We all struggled with it. No matter how qualified we were, it was a struggle. So, what is it that everyone should know before they step into that?
Yeah, I think that more than anything, students need to be very self-aware, right? So it doesn't matter what major that you had. It doesn't matter if you were a great student or an okay student. One of the things that has always really shocked me is how self-unaware very smart students are. Okay. And so they begin their careers with a very unclear sense of what's important to them. And so one of the things that I think is very important is that students first try to be more introspective right? They really try to get in touch with what are the things that make them happy, right? And so there's this Japanese model called Ikigai, Ikigai, and you're nodding your head, so I think you know it, right? And I think it's an incredibly powerful tool that tells students, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I'm good at, this is what the world needs, this is where I can contribute, and also this is where I can make money, right? Because ultimately we all need to be compensated for our gifts and our skills. So it's a strange thing that so many people study so many different subjects, but they don't study themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing how many students would come up to me, right? And I'm not their father or their uncle. And they would say, Professor Mike, what should I do for my career? And my answer always is, I can never tell you what to do, but I can help you get in touch with what you love to do, what you're good at, what I've observed that you're good at, right? And so that you can either hold up a mirror to yourself and know that, you're getting validated, or in some cases you're being told. And I remember one case specifically, there was a young woman from Africa who was very independent minded. She was very outspoken. She cared greatly about social causes. And she came to me one day and says, I'm going to join the US Air Force because they're going to pay for my education. And I looked at her and I said, I cannot imagine a worse fit for you, right? And I said this out of love and respect, right? You are not the kind of person that will take orders, right? You're very creative. Why would you do it? And this is an example of students that make decisions out of fear. They'll take the very first job that they are offered, thinking no one will ever give me another offer, so let me just take this. So you should be very self-aware, and you should have enough confidence in your abilities to trust that you will find, the universe will help you find the right opportunity if you just trust in the process and if you have the patience to do so. So I think those are the things that I would tell students that they need to do. Now, I would also say, and this is not easy for any of us, is that ultimately, as much as we want to please our parents, we don't get to bring our parents to work with us every day. And a lot of times I've had students whose parents wanted them to take the high-paying job, the prestigious job, the status job, versus the job that the students love. And you will appreciate this story. There was a young woman at Berkeley who was a student and a mentee of mine, and she is from Nairobi. And she is a double major from Berkeley. She studied data science and business, and she was given a very high-paying offer from Salesforce.com, but she wasn't that excited about it. Her parents wanted her to take the job. And then out of nowhere, she got this offer from this really interesting startup founded by two Harvard students that were creating a platform that would allow even very low-income students access to the best professors in the world. And she was super excited about it. And she called me and was really distraught because she didn't know what she was going to do. She wanted to please her parents. But at the end of the day, it was so clear that this was not the path she was on. And she decided to go with what she loved. And she's now running all of Africa for this edtech startup. And she's only been there since September. And she's already been promoted. And I've already had her founder emailing me say, my God, this young woman has been such a remarkable find. Can you send me more? Right? And it's because she's doing what she loves and she's having impact in the world, right? So these are the things that I want students to understand, that they have a lot of choices. They shouldn't compromise. They shouldn't settle. They don't have to pay their dues anymore. Those days are over.
So people who
But,
are opting for these programs, entrepreneurship and
yeah,
innovation, and something like marketing. So what is
right.
the best way for them to get into the job market, because also not everyone wants to have their own business right off the
Yeah.
bat.
Yeah, I mean, so listen, if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's very, very challenging to just come out of school with no experience and no skills. So there's every good reason why you might want to go work for a successful startup, right? And so if you know that you want to be an entrepreneur and you think that this is the path, now it gives you a lot of focus, right? Now the question is, do you want to be a social entrepreneur or a traditional entrepreneur? And
Right.
then within those two fields, now you begin to say, okay, so if I care about social entrepreneurship, do I care about the development? Do I care about the environment? Do I care about social justice? Do I care about human rights? Do I care about food security? And so now you start to say, okay, that I now know enough about myself and about what I love. So let me think about, these are the three categories of social impact startups I'd like to work in. And
Right.
then you go out and identify those companies, right? And you start to learn about them and think about, you know, is this a company where they're going to mentor me, where they're going to give me the opportunity to really do meaningful work?
Yes.
And you could apply as an intern, right? So there's so many ways to get the attention. You could attend hackathons that they do, or somehow become a part of their community, right?
Right.
And participate and contribute to what they're doing and just become known to them. And
Correct.
so I think that it's no longer about just applying for a job, right? It's about becoming known to a company and proving that you have similar values, a similar work ethic, that you care about the things they care about. And it's a very different type of interview, right? It's not about someone asking you, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? That
True.
is so dated.
Yeah.
It's, do we respect each other? Can we work together? Do we have values that both of us want to, share? And do we see the world in a way that we have problems that we want to solve that are similar, right? So to me, this is the way that you go and find jobs today. It's not about just pounding out your resume to 400 employers and then waiting, sort of, randomly to see who responds. And then, okay, now I have five choices. This is the set of companies that I'll work for. That is so 1940s, you
It
know?
is, it is. And
Yeah.
students that I coach today, this is the first question they would ever ask. How is it that we
Right.
can get a job in our
Right.
field? Especially this comes from management students more than anyone else, because
Hmm.
management students also feel that they don't have many transferable skills or technical skills.
Right. Yeah.
So, and that's a rampant thing over here, especially in India. It's a
Yeah.
huge thing, and especially Indians who want to study abroad as well. I have seen people
Right.
applying to 200 companies, to every
Yeah.
kind of job they can find. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
if you don't have a niche in mind, if you don't have a role in mind, you're
Yeah.
not going to end up with anything.
Yeah. I mean, that lack of focus is only going to lead to you being so overwhelmed,
Yeah.
right? And how do you prepare for an interview when you're talking to, like, big companies, small companies, governmental agencies, consulting companies, right? You don't bring any commitment, you don't bring any focus, you can't really add value,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like gambling, right? You're just throwing, you're throwing dice down on the table, and whatever comes up is what you're going to settle for. So this is, obviously it's great that you're helping students, as I am helping students, because often they don't get this advice at home, right? They wind up not getting this kind of advice even from their own families, not because their families don't want to help them, they just don't know any better, because their mental model is an old, obsolete model,
Yes.
which is, you got to get your resume shined up, you got to send it out to a bunch of people, right? And that's just not the way it works anymore.
But like, what
Yeah.
kind of skills should management people have today that would
Yeah.
not ensure, but kind of, give them a step up into their field?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, right? So while I was at Holt, we wound up redesigning the MBA curriculum. And as a result of that, I was lucky enough to work with a couple of professors and the president of the school. Now, this is going back a few years, but we interviewed 200 of the world's largest hiring authorities. So you can imagine companies like Unilever and Procter and Gamble and Deloitte and Accenture. And what we heard was very consistent. They feel that students are way too focused on their technical or their functional skills.
Yeah.
And they were really lacking in their soft skills, right? They were lacking in creativity. They were lacking in sort of being self-sufficient starters. They were lacking in leadership. They weren't entrepreneurial enough. They weren't resourceful. They weren't problem solvers. And so, again, very much like we talked about in the beginning about self-awareness, it's
Right.
not just about whether I'm a good accountant or a good finance person or a good engineer, right? Because that in and of itself is it might get you a job, but it's not going to give you what you need to succeed. You will very quickly plateau.
Right.
And so what companies want is they want young leaders, right? And leadership doesn't come from technical skills. It comes from soft skills. It comes
Right.
from empathy. It comes from the ability to relate to others, to be able to inspire others, to be a good team player, right? So these are some of the things that I think students need to be able to add to their portfolio of skills. And
Right.
these things you cannot learn in a book, right? These are the things that come from internships and hackathons and volunteering and student clubs and, taking on leadership roles in
Right.
organizations, right? That's where this stuff comes from.
So what this is like such great advice right here. I mean, it's so useful for students to know that because I don't think a lot of people, even students in college over here who are doing their
Yeah.
undergraduation,
Yeah.
there are not a lot of professors who are going to tell them that
Right.
at
Of
all.
course,
So,
well, because most professors, certainly in India, have not really had traditional careers, right? So they have a mental model that is from when they were students 20, 30 years ago,
right.
right? And they also, because they are professors of accounting, professors of engineering, their whole worldview is through that lens. So of course they think the more intelligent you are, the better you are as an engineer, the more successful you're going to be. And that's not the case. It's just not. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the resources or books that you would recommend
Yeah.
to students that would just absolutely help them?
So there's a few that are I think very powerful, and I think everybody should have, right? So one of them goes back to this concept of self-awareness. And the book is called Designing Your Life. And it is written by two Stanford professors that are applying the principles of design thinking to your own career.
Right.
And what I love about this book is it's very actionable, right? It's not theoretical, right? It provides you with a bunch of tools that allow you to kind of say, okay, these are three different potential career paths that I can imagine possibly taking. And I realized that, no dream becomes real unless you take action.
Right.
So it forces you to make commitments to say, okay, if I want to become, the head of a social venture, or if I want to become a lawyer, or if I want to become an engineer, these are the things that I need to do today so that by the time I graduate, I have all of the tools that I need to be successful, right? So Designing Your Life is a book that I think is very powerful. A second book is written by the late Professor Clayton Christensen, who is the person who coined the term disruptive innovation. And
Right.
although he wrote many books about innovation, maybe his most important book is a book called How Will You Measure Your Life?
Right.
Okay. And what's really interesting about this book is Clay Christensen went to school with some very, very famous men, right? He went to Harvard Business School.
Yeah.
And a number of his classmates wound up in jail. Okay. And so one of his classmates was the CEO of Enron, Jeff Skilling. And if you know Enron was one of the greatest corporate scandals in history.
Yes.
And so one of the questions Christensen asks is, so you've got a guy like Jeff Skilling who was so brilliant that he was the youngest partner in the history of McKinsey. And yet something about his values was so corrupt that he decided to create essentially a Ponzi scheme that harmed thousands and thousands of people.
Yes.
Just so he could be wealthy. And so, so this is a really incredible book by someone who went to school with some of the most famous business people of our era. And he's able to say, these are different paths you can take.
Yes.
And only you can decide, what your values are and what you will stick to. But you need to do this with intention.
Absolutely.
Because you could very quickly get lured into, I'm going to make money regardless. And of course, from your own country, the former McKinsey managing partner, who was from India and who many years was considered one of the greatest Indian leaders in history, started doing insider trading. And when he was interviewed by the New York Times, and they asked him, why would you do this? Clearly, you knew it was wrong. His message was, well, I was smarter than all of my friends, all of my professional friends. They were all worth $1 billion. I was only worth $100 million.
Yeah.
And I felt it wasn't fair that they were worth so much more money than me. So I decided I would catch up. Now, that's an insane thing to believe, much less try to do. And so what I love about Christensen's book is it helps you understand the importance of integrity and values. Right. And today I got a question from a very smart student, which is, how do we not become slaves to capitalism? Which was an incredible question from a student who happens to be not a humanities student, but a chemical engineer at one of the top schools in Azerbaijan. And so I think this is an example of the kind of book that you would want to read to sort of, frame your model. And then, of course, as you said, there's a ton of online courses.
Yes.
And so I think we all need to be lifelong learners, okay? I have less and less faith in the value of someone with multiple degrees, right? I think that you wind up becoming, this certification junkie. And I'd much rather see people say, okay, this is the things that I need to learn this year to make the right decisions or to be successful in this role at this time in my life. Let me go off and find a couple of great online courses that I can take that can help me kind of level up my skills to the next level, and maybe work on a 4-course certificate, right? So, so now I have something to show for my studies, but I'm not investing 2 years and another $150,000 getting another degree, right? There comes a point where education in and of itself has diminishing returns.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, and then, of course, in your field, you have to be very current. So, what are a couple of blogs that you need to read, or a couple of newsletters that are going to allow you to be very, very well informed about your special field, whatever that might be, right? And just be committed to, regardless of how old you are or what you do, you realize that you're always learning. So I'll end the answer with this wonderful quote. One of my very favorite quotes comes from a futurist by the name of Alvin Toffler. And he says, in the 21st century, the illiterate are not those people who cannot read and write. Today's illiterate are those people that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so unlearning and relearning turns out to be a very important skill. It's not about what got us here, because what got us here is probably obsolete. It's about what is going to get us to the future end goal. And it's probably a very different approach than anything we've done in the past. So that dynamic thinking is very, very critical, right? That's a mindset.